Good morning to everyone. You're in the room for this Prezo, the top 5 CISO findings report from Laris. This was the first of our top 5 lists for last year that we presented on our blogs and website at the beginning, first quarter of this year. So this was the first of the reports that we released. I am Mark Arnold. I am the VP of Advisory Services at Laris. I lead the vCISO practice there. We are, if you know about Laris, we are in the space, we do offensive security. So a lot of red team, purple team, blue team. What we've done in recent years is start the vCISO practice where we're coupling building mature programs along with our tactical services. So it's a very unique mix. I am a longtime RVA Sec attendee, supporter. I've been here from the beginning, supporting Jake. I actually fly down from Boston every year to be here in RVA. I am an OWASP Boston chapter leader. There are other things I could say, but most importantly, at this point in my career, I try to be an encourager of those who are trying to get into the space. I am a recovering con organizer, so we applaud Jake for pulling this off every year. My adjacent cyber interest is about gray zone tactics and underserved communities. Essentially, that's the intersection of religion, politics, disinformation campaigns, and cyber amplification. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking today about the top 5 CISO findings. We'll look at a few recommendations and reimagine something that we'll present later in the deck, and then get you guys out of here. First question I would ask the room is, do we need more lists? So I'm giving you another list today. That kid in the picture, that's my son when he was 4 years old. And that's pretty much how he reacts today. At 14, he's graduating tonight from middle school. Do we need more lists? Everyone has one. Every org, every vendor that's out here is going to put up a report. We all know it's bad, but the data, plural, have a story. And I think we have an opportunity here in this room to compare some stories. So a lot of this data is culled and curated from finance clients, healthcare, orgs, manufacturing businesses, hospitality and recreation, retail, utilities and energy, legal and law, sports and entertainment. For the most part, we're looking at small business to mid-market companies, but there's some very large critical infrastructure clients that are part of these data, and some very high-profile clients. Now, before I start with the top 5, any guesses of what the top 5 might be? Local admins, okay. Budget, okay. Anything else? Okay, let's jump into it. So there's going to be some organizational commentary and some technical aspects of this countdown. So starting with number 5, the first thing that we're seeing challenges among many organizations is asset management. So everyone has asset management blues, yes? Folks in the room. Organizations lack effective asset management, so if you don't know what you have, you can't protect it. When we think about asset management at Laris, it's not just physical or electronic assets. We're thinking about social assets, data, credentials. We do a lot, obviously, around attack surface management, and so we're looking at places where credentials may have landed. Those are places of management that we should be aware of, and when we're not aware of what we're managing, we open ourselves to spoofing, tampering. When we think about threat modeling categories, which lead to financial loss, higher insurance costs, and problems with brand management. Other targets include intangible assets such as intellectual property and goodwill. These are things that we see companies struggling with in the financial services sector, the healthcare sector, and the manufacturing and retail sectors. So this is one of the statements that we see in some of our interviews that comes up often. We're waiting on procuring a thing before we can improve our asset management capabilities. And we saw some of this yesterday in Luke's talk. You know, we need to buy that shiny object, that shiny box that's going to find all of our things. When in this room we could work with our clients and tell them that there are things out there that they can leverage right now. I mean, there are free tools out there to help with the tax service management, to help them to understand where their assets are. And it's not waiting for that big thing that, no disrespect to the vendors that are outside this room, but it's no disrespect to them. There are some things that we can do right now to find out our digital, electric, social, and other types of assets. Number 2 or number 4, counting down from 5 to 4, our companies are still seeing red, so vulnerabilities is a big thing. Organizations remain challenged in their efforts to discover vulnerabilities ahead of the threat actors or patch in a timely manner. One common mistake that we're seeing involves not scanning all systems for vulnerabilities, including network servers, workstations, and applications, and other. Another concern involves not setting clear priorities or scope for fixing those vulnerabilities. So not just the practice of scanning, but also having a programmatic approach to remediating said assets. Along with that, we see patching delays. Again, the lack of effective and timely patches opens the door to cyber attacks. This is very fundamental at this point in our talk. Verizon DBER in 2022 listed these type 4 keys or paths leading into our estates, credentials, phishing, botnets, and the last of these is exploiting vulnerabilities. So one of the things that comes up in our conversations, in our interviews with certain clients is this, or statements like this. We do bi-yearly third-party testing. Okay, everyone just glossed over that. We do vulnerability scanning and pen test every 2 years. Not biannually, bi-yearly. And this particular comment came from a very large critical infrastructure client. They have all the tools, all the wonderful shiny boxes, and they don't validate that those tools are working. And when they do, it's done every 2 years, not twice a year or even annually. And so some of the interesting comments that come out of these conversations. Here's another. Tenable's not working. And so this particular client said, Tenable's not working, so we're going to get Rapid7. So that says to me, once you get Rapid7, it's still not going to be working. So this is me. I drive a Ford Fusion hybrid. It's cool, gets me from point A to point B, but I want this other car on the left. I want that to be me, that Mach-E Ford Fusion. It's still going to do the same thing. It's going to cost me more money, but it's still going to get me from point A to point B. When I hear conversations like that, Tenable's not working, I want to get a replacement vulnerability scanner. That suggests to me that we need to do more work with the operators, not necessarily getting more tooling. So I worked at a very large retailer. I'm sure many of you have bought from them. I'll throw the name out, Marshalls, TJ Maxx. I worked at TJX. And we spent $13 million on a SIEM after the breach, $13 million. And then 5 years later, we thought we would replace that SIEM with another SIEM because that SIEM wasn't working, spending another $13 million. It's not the tooling, it's the operators that we're finding are having the challenges when we're having these conversations about how do we do better with some of these top 5 findings. The third item in our countdown are blind spots. So organizations continue to lack proper logging and monitoring, leading to blind spots. So having full visibility into hardware assets and software in our IT, OT, our cloud environments, our DevOps environments. So our systems are not able to track or collect logs of events, and so there's the inability to find out what happened in the end. And so we're seeing this at a lot of verticals across all the verticals in our curated list of things. And so because we can't find or see what's happening, we can't do the work of non-repudiation. So threat actors are able to get in and do whatever in our environments, and then this impacts our incident response. Down to number 2. This is the one I thought everyone would guess: insecure configurations. We're seeing this across, again, financial services, healthcare, manufacturing, retail. Default and insecure configurations persist across these sectors. These are dangerous realities because they are well known by attackers and thus easy to exploit. We are seeing the use of unnecessary apps, unnecessary services. We call them extraneous services, protocols, and the like. Default account usernames, passwords, and all of the things that we would consider insecure out of the box. This opens up organizations to spoofing, again, thinking with these threat modeling categories, tampering, repudiation. One of our threat leads said this about configurations: we mostly exploit misconfigurations these days and test more than anything, with a small percentage being lack of patches or new vulns, meaning our tactical leads don't burn tradecraft on these things. We basically can get in most days by just looking at clients' misconfigurations. Anecdotally, I was at DEF CON one year, HallCon, so you're standing in these long lines at DEF CON, and I was telling one of my new pals in line how we had to send a pen tester home because we at this retailer we were liable to do a pen test for a regulation on a yearly basis, and so this gentleman friend of mine who was running the pen test, good friend, gets started on the first day of the pen test and shuts the entire business down. So I'm sitting at my desk, I'm thinking this guy's kicking ass on the pen test, everything's good, and I see a bunch of network personnel marching down the hall toward me, very upset with what had gone on. He ran some kind of scan, and it shut all of our major networking devices down. And so I'm talking to this gentleman in the line about this. I'm like, wow, our network team is horrible. They don't know what they're doing. And they told me to send the pen tester home, so we did that to appease them. And just those guys are horrible. And the gentleman who was standing with me at DEF CON says this to me. He says, "You should have sent the network team home." And so it's like he's basically saying to me, "You're not eating your own dog food." It's like there were misconfigurations in the network equipment that were exposed because of a loud scan, and so this whole notion of making sure that whatever the devices are, whether they're network, AppSec, or web apps or web assets, that we're looking at our configurations, and I basically had to eat crow that day. Here are the last of the top 5. Data flow, so the gray areas, data flow diagrams. Anyone in the room do data flow diagrams by show of hands? I see about a handful. This is a challenge because if you don't know where your data is flowing, it's going to be hard for us to spot anomalies, right? If we know where the data is flowing, we know about the normal way that business is being constructed, we know where our data is supposed to be going. If it's going elsewhere and we don't have those data flow diagrams, it's going to be hard for us to do the hard work to understand and spot those anomalies. And so we need data flow diagrams to spot those anomalous risks and to be able to implement countermeasures against those risks. What is my data doing? It's critical to know where that data comes, and where it's going, where it's sourced from, where it's being processed along the way. And getting a handle on these data flows enables all of us to quickly get a handle on our security risk and implement mitigation measures in a timely fashion. Common methods for data flow are these diagrams for the rest of us in the room, using DFD, templates, swim lane diagrams, activity diagrams, and the like, to understand where those data flows are. For me, this is one of the #1 issues that we're seeing at our clients. You don't know where your data is, you don't know where it's going, You've built and designed your network, you built your infrastructure, but you still don't know where the data is going. And we've seen this in mid-market, small business, but even in critical infrastructure. Capital One breach, and I'm not trying to be mad if anyone here works for Capital One. This is just a case study from 4 years ago. This case study was published at the MIT Sloan School of Management. It was a case study on this Capital One data breach by gentlemen Nito, Madnick, and Paula in March of 2020. So what we have here is kind of mapping out what I just showed you in the first few slides about the top 5. We'll see them here actually in this case study. If we look at what happens here at number 1, the attacker is trying to hide their access by using a Tor network, and so they got into the network using Tor. And so now, because they're able to hide access, we can't do the repudiation. We can't do the non-repudiation step, right? They're in. We can't find them. Point 2, they get to do an SSRF, not a CSRF, but an SSRF query against an EC2 instance, and they end up against a misconfigured mod security WAF. And so once they're in there, they've got access available to them that they're unauthorized to have, and so they're able now to do escalation of privilege. Once they got in there, they started doing some tampering and began to run other commands that got them access to this other EC2 instance at the top left. So now we're seeing them actuate information disclosure. So once they're here, they are now able to run other commands. They've gotten to that metadata service. They've run some commands, and now they're getting credentials. They got an access key that they were not allowed to get. That access key had other secret key information, and so they were able to elevate their privileges there. And then once they were there, they were able to actually dump all of the AWS S3 buckets using a sync command, basically to copy that data from the buckets. All of that started because of issues around misconfiguration. There are vulnerabilities in the network. There are blind spots. Everything that we talked about in the top 5 happened during this particular data breach. If you look at some of the stages of the breach, stage 1, there was command and control, right? Used Tor to hide access. The initial access used SSRF to run commands. They continually gain access by exploiting a WAF misconfiguration to relay commands to the AWS metadata service. They obtain the access credentials. Then they began to execute commands on the AWS command line, the CLI. And then they were able to discover and run commands to list all the AWS S3 buckets, and then run a sync command to copy all of those buckets to a local machine. So now you have exfiltration. All of that starts from that initial incursion into the network, and then those issues, misconfiguration, vulnerabilities, and blind spots. If we think about this from a framework perspective, such an attack could be mitigated by well-configured WAF and preventative controls, such as periodic vulnerability scanners. So everything, again, that we talked about. Maybe for this one control, I think the importance of this slide is showing that we need to understand these issues in the context of some type of framework, some type of guide, some type of benchmark, or some type of guidance to understand what might we have done better in this particular instance. And so some of the things that are listed here are vulnerability management plan, maybe have that developed somewhat, look for audit logs, reduce the principle of least functionality, collect event data, and so on and so on. There are a lot of things here that would have helped mitigate some of that attack. Now, most of us in this room might be saying, yeah, that's pretty obvious, Captain Obvious. We need a graphic designer. We need help. Paul Asadorian, my meme genius, gave me this meme yesterday. At this point in the talk, it kind of seems, somewhat underwhelming that these are issues that we all expected to hear about, misconfiguration, vulnerabilities. We understand that. It's underwhelming from that perspective, but it's overwhelming for some of the clients that we serve. And so one of the reasons we have you in the room today is a call to action for a collaboration, capacity, and capability. Most of our clients that are doing this work, they don't have the benefits of having people, having capacity, having resource, having, dare I say, diversity to help bring these capabilities to bear on clients that are struggling against these top 5 issues. And what we try to socialize with our clients are these kind of tenets that everyone has a hand in security. Everyone has a role, a responsibility to make sure that our orgs are secure, that our security programs consist of process and outcomes. Our security outcomes, for processes like threat modeling will be everywhere, and so that we have to understand where those risks are, and that the primary security efforts should be baked in early in all of our processes. So it's not just about a single business unit or a single group or a security team. This has to be a collaborative and democratic effort to ensure that we're baking security in. The other thing I wanted to mention in terms of kind of remediating what we're seeing in terms of the top 5 issues is having a framework. We need something to kind of help us ground ourselves and understand those issues against a particular framework of sorts. Equifax just recently even made their security controls framework available for free, understanding that the work that's needed to get all of us grounded is to have a framework of some sort to understand those issues in context. When we go into particular organizations, the typical ones we see are these that you see on the screen. We do a lot of work with credit unions, CMMC, NERC for some of the utilities and critical infrastructure agencies. CIS is really actually a benchmark, but folks are using that to kind of ground themselves and self-assess against some of the issues that we mentioned. And then obviously NIST is the well-known cybersecurity framework that we are all aware of. This is where I want to park our time for a few minutes here, on this NIST framework. Because some of the orgs that we walk into don't have a framework, there's no way for them to understand their issues against a consensus framework or guideline. And so what we begin to do with them is to map those issues: asset patch vulnerability management, vulnerability patch or gaps, configuration issues, visibility, data flow. We map them against the framework themselves. So we want to see asset and patch management, vulnerability management in the context of identify. Vulnerability, actually, if I were to do this mapping, I would probably send vulnerability across all 5 areas. If I had real estate here, vulnerability should be across all of these areas. Vulnerability and patch gaps, we map them initially to protect. Configuration issues, we want to be able to detect those early on. And visibility, can we respond? Data flow diagrams maybe is in both of those slots, respond and recover, because we want to know where our data are in a time ahead of the threat actor, ahead of the threats that are coming at us. There should be a third row here in which we talk about controls that would fit in some of these slots under identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Some of our best clients are doing that. If you're not doing that today, I suggest and recommend that you map whatever controls, whatever you've bought, map them against a framework. We're not just buying and implementing, but we're implementing against a consensus standard, whatever it may be, whatever suits your business or is tailored to your business, to understand best how those controls should be functioning against the framework. But here's the neat thing that I want to introduce today, and that's mapping testing, tactical test against the framework. So we tell everyone, go ahead and get a pen test. Do an annual pen test. What we're thinking about and reimagining is mapping a pen testing, putting a testing map, not just a pen testing map, but a testing map, a tactical map that helps us validate all of the points of the NIST CSF framework. So if you see under identify, what we're doing there, we're only doing external vulnerability assessments. We're only doing web app testing under identify to validate that our controls are able to identify what we have designed them to do. Under protect, we're only doing external pen test and internal pen test. Under detect, and we'll go into a few of these momentarily, under detect, then we introduce red team and insider threat. We're not doing red team at the identify stage, but we are actually mapping out a testing program for organizations. Under respond, we start to do red team with persistence. We'll also maybe throw in purple team and physical. We call these our blended attacks, or blended meaning we're cutting into fences, but we're also gaining a social and physical footprint, and then combining those from a persistence perspective. And then finally, recover. With recover, we're running some of the same tests, but also, again, throwing in a little bit of purple to help determine whether the blue team can see what we're doing from a red team perspective. But most importantly, all of this is mapped to a framework. Our PCIs and some of our regulatory compliance out there tells us to do a pen test, do a test, without giving us a descriptive or a prescriptive to do these tests. I think what some of our team members have started to think through is we're not just doing a pen test just to be doing a pen test, or a red team just to be doing a red team. We're trying to map out a testing prescriptive that gets you from point A, where you can take a Mike Tyson punch, to point B, where you can take Mike Tyson out, if that makes sense. Right. So, what does this look like? Internal, external testing on our map, very busy piece here. We want to test whether or not our client can protect based on the controls that they've established against the NIST CSF framework. So what is this? We want to first validate that patching is working, that the patch capabilities, that the patch processes are working as they're supposed to work. And so remember, one of our initial top 5 was patching. In our testing phase for this particular control under protect, we want to make sure that your patch validation is actually working. We're also going to make sure or test whether or not that how you've designed asset management is actually functioning as is designed under our internal and external testing phases. We ask the clients to provide us known IP addresses, subnets, and domain names. We'll scan, we'll do some manual testing, and then next steps is reviewing discovered assets, vulnerabilities, and giving some type of risk rating for that internal process. In this instance, we are concerned about patching because it falls within our top 5 patching issues. And so, again, very tailored, very catered type of testing. We're not just throwing spitballs against the wall. We are tailoring a testing regime against the framework to meet the issues or the gaps that we find in some of our initial assessment phases. Red team and the physical assessment team, those are later on in the NIST CSF, so we're testing whether or not you can detect that we're in there, and then once we're in there, can you respond quick enough and recover? So what does this look like? We're validating, very specifically, the incident response processes. We're in your network. Can you get us out? So you've heard a lot of that this week in various talks. That's one of the early tenets of Red Team. And so we're not doing a pen test, we're doing Red Team for a specific control. I keep repeating that, for a specific control in the framework. So these are all tailored to the framework. And so you have a predictable testing map for a program. Similarly, for the Red Team and physical assessment, we want known IPs, subnets, domain names. And then for the physical assessment, we want list of users, in scope for email, so we're going to do the social engineering, we're going to do phishing, smishing, all of that, to determine the extent of your awareness of us being in the network. And so this is essentially that Mike Tyson fight. We're sparring with the defensive team. We're living in the environment, knowing that we're being hunted. So we expect that, but it's not just us doing a Red Team. Again, this is a validation phase against a framework, which leads then to next steps that are meant to review the physical security processes and to tune incident response processes. And that's important. That last part, tune, is usually leads into some type of purple team engagement, where we're saying to our clients, we did this against the controls that you say you have. Did you see what we did? If you didn't see it, here's a knob to turn. We're going to try it again. We'll run that test again. The blue team will say, yes, we saw it this time. Everyone has improved themselves in just a matter of moments because we're working in concert together to understand at a deeply ingrained level what the steps should be and what the responses should be. Is that pretty clear? Okay. At the end of all this work, we are meant to kind of rank these risks against DREAD or EPSS or others. We want to quantify the risk against a particular standard. Here we have FAIR, which is the factor analysis of information risk. It's a practical framework for understanding, measuring, and analyzing information risk. And so that would be the steps that comes out of our testing. And then finally, we rinse, wash, and repeat and do threat modeling against our environment. Once all of that work has been done, identifying and doing the gap analysis, understanding those issues in context of the framework, understanding those gaps, and then running a very prescripted testing format against those frameworks to understand those gaps in context. Now, Jake's going to kill me because I'm already at summary, because I'm talking too fast today. But in summary, one of the things that we want to do is start thinking about addressing those top 5 vCISO findings. Number 1, our goal is to select a relevant framework. We talked about that. Find a framework that makes sense to your org. You all understand the businesses that you're working in, whether they're healthcare, financial, manufacturing, retail. Find a framework that you can tailor your org to, if you're not already doing that, and then map those gaps against the framework. We also then want to conduct a gap analysis against that framework. That's kind of what the top 5 vCISO findings are. We looked at the list of clients. We looked at the commonalities across all the clients and came up with those top 5 as gaps that we're seeing across the industry. We have to do that for our own internal orgs, and so gap analysis is probably familiar language in the room that we do to bring those issues to the fore. Then we try to understand those issues against a framework, or understand those issues against the larger threat landscape. There's a link here that I'll make available. It's the VCDB. Is anyone aware of that link, the VCDB? It's about finding issues. I'll make that link available. It's a helpful list that's curated to help contextualize the issues that you might find in your own gap analysis. If third parties are coming in to do work, you can see if what they found is actually in this list. If it's in this list, that means the threat actors are also aware of the issues. We'll make that available. And then I think one of the things that we wanted to make public today is that testing approach, that philosophy of having a test map, not just a pen test, but a scripted testing tactical set of engagements for organizations that they do not bi-yearly or even biannually. We want to get to continuous, but we want to make sure that the test harnesses and the validations that we are using through our testing map is mapped back to a NIST framework or to any framework, and to make sure that we're validating that our controls that we've implemented to reduce risk in our orgs is actually working as said. That statement is not the statement that I've only made this week. It's been made several times this week. We want to validate our assumptions through a prescripted testing map. And then finally, we want to rank those risks, quantify those risks. We then move to that risk treatment stage. What can we fix right now? What can we accept? What can we move on or transfer to others? But it doesn't happen unless we're actually, I believe, doing mapping the gap analyses to our testing grid or testing map against a framework or benchmark. And then finally, the last thing we want to do is wash, rinse, and repeat and start this whole cycle over again. And so there you have it, our view of the top 5 vCISO findings. And Jake, I did it in 40 minutes. Any questions, any surprises, or anything that folks want to ask?
How often are you encountering people with going against CMMC?
It's only in the federal agencies for the most part, some of the critical infrastructure. So there's some water utilities, some nuclear orgs that we're working with where some of that's happening, where they're trying to determine whether or not they're going to embark on that. That gives us some challenge because now we have to remap. It's easier to map to NIST CSF. Now, taking our test and remapping them to other frameworks is the work ahead for us.
Is there already mapping for CSF to 800-171? I haven't seen that.
To 171?
171, which is the CMMC.
Yes, we have some of those crosswalks already, so that does exist. Yeah, it should be NIST, yeah. Yeah. It's a pared down version, correct. I agree with you.
So are these top 5 findings based on Laris's virtual CISO service, or is it a general survey of the industry?
Our virtual CISO services and some collaboration with our insider threat folks and our other AppSec and testers. If you see some of the other top 5 lists on the site, you can go to the site and see those. There will be even more granular details about some of the issues that we're finding.
What did you think of Equifax's security framework?
I think it's outstanding. It's a lot of these conversations are calls to action, and they've accepted the call. They put that out to the universe for us to say, yes, I know there are other frameworks out there, but here's a framework that's baked out of adversity, if you will. Me being at TJX, I know the heartache of. We were the cleanup team after the cleanup team, but sometimes hurt elevates or spring shots maturity, and so I think that type of document that comes from someone who's been through it it meets the test.
So my client has a new approach where they're taking the enterprise IT services and making that already continuous assessed, continuous authorized, and that leaves our, I'll say business units and commercial term, our business units to just focus on development.
Mm-hmm.
So that way they just focus that application layer and they do their things there.
Sure.
And they're inheriting, if you will, the controls from our platform and our infrastructure. Is that common in the commercial space? I'm federal, so I have no clue.
We are seeing something similar to that. reducing tasks, reducing workforce responsibility by taking some of that work and task off their plate to focus on core business processes. We are seeing that in the other parts, other sectors as well. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much for being in the talk.